We have an update to a story that no one was hoping for. A 3-year-old boy allegedly beaten by his mom's boyfriend. He had been on life support for weeks, but now his family says that Dawson Zamora has passed away. Now this development is taking the legal part of this case. The case now facing his mom and her boyfriend to a new level because this is now allegedly a murder. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, I need to take a moment, pause from this episode of On the Case, and before we move on, talk about an important sponsor. And with this sponsor, we're talking about a major financial development that is shaping everything we know about money. Central banks are hoarding and purchasing physical gold at a pace that we haven't seen in decades. Gold is up 40% in the past year, and experts say it's not stopping. So how do you get in without dropping thousands up front? Acre Gold makes it simple to own physical gold without expense. With subscriptions from $30 to $250 per month, anyone can start by making monthly payments at your own pace. And when you reach the price of your bar, Acre Gold ships it to your door. Real gold that you can have, you can save, you can pass down. Secure your wealth and take control of your future. Start today at getacregold.com/onthecase. Dawson Zamora's dad has been by his side in the hospital for weeks, and he has also been keeping the public updated on how his son has been doing, how his son has been fighting for his life since allegedly surviving an attack and repeated abuse at the hands of his mom's boyfriend. And last night, he posted the update that frankly will just make your heart sink. Now, this is the picture that Dawson Zamora posted last night on Facebook. It's a picture of him holding his son for the final time. And this is what he wrote in that Facebook post, quote, "My heart is extremely heavy, but this is important that I notify the public before others speculate and speak for me. I want you guys to hear it directly from me, as y'all have been on this journey alongside me. With great sorrow, I come here today to notify the public that my son Dawson has passed away. He died on my birthday yesterday, December 7th at 10:42 a.m. That was his time of death. His gift to me was his final breath, and we are now forever interlocked with my birth and his death. He held on to spend one last birthday with me and refused to go until then." That is a post that just hits you in the gut. And it is just so hard to think about a parent having to write that and having to go through what Dawson and his dad have been through over the past several weeks. Now, this takes this case to an entirely new level because there are major charges, not just facing Dawson Zamora's mom, but also her boyfriend. Now, this is a picture of Dawson's mom. We're going to talk about the case that is facing her in just a moment, but I want to lay out the alleged facts according to law enforcement about how we got to this point. And if you're feeling a sense of sadness and emotion for how we started this story, I'll tell you to be prepared for feelings of anger and frustration. Dawson's mom is named Chelsea Berg. On social media, she seemed, frankly, like the last person who you would expect to face charges connected to now the alleged murder of her son. And it appears that Dawson lived at least part of the time with Chelsea Berg. His parents are divorced, and as we just told you, his dad was in the ICU with Dawson, and he said that Dawson had brain damage because of what had happened. Now, previously, his dad had written on Facebook, quote, Dawson, was pronounced dead by the time the medical professionals could get to him. No one knows the full amount of time he was deceased because he was driven to the hospital by his abuser after being beaten, and the police were not called. He says Dawson was able to be brought back to life, but again, he was in incredibly rough shape, and he had brain damage that eventually took his life. Now, this is the man who allegedly beat Dawson. His name is Christopher Alexander, and he is the boyfriend of Chelsea Berg. Court documents obtained by Fox 4 in Dallas show that on October 14th, Alexander took young Dawson to the hospital, allegedly claiming that he had a fall. Alexander told his girlfriend, Chelsea, that he heard a loud thud. Chelsea reportedly told police that she left Dawson with her boyfriend around 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:20 or so. Then shortly after, Alexander sent her a text about Dawson eating lunch. Alexander called Berg, saying that he was rushing the boy to the hospital. Documents obtained by that TV station say that when Berg got to the hospital, Alexander told the story that he was in the other room and then he heard a thud, but he didn't share any more than that. Certainly sounds a bit suspicious. Then, at the hospital, Alexander reportedly got an attorney and stopped talking to police about what happened. Hospital staff reportedly said that Chelsea's son's injuries were far more severe than the fall that Alexander was claiming happened. His injuries included bleeding in his brain, bruising in various states of healing over his entire body, wounds to his chest and stomach, and even anal trauma. Now, Berg told investigators that her boy did not have those injuries when she left him in the care of her boyfriend in the morning. But remember, doctors say there were bruises in various states of healing on the boy's body. So that story does not add up. We also have information that shows Chelsea's alleged side of the story, that she had no idea that any of this could possibly happen. Some new information that came to light that shows that is allegedly a lie, and we'll have more on that in just a second. 2 days after Dawson was rushed to the hospital, the man that his mom reportedly left him in the care of, Christopher Alexander, was arrested. He is facing charges of injury to a child, stalking, and tampering and fabricating evidence. He is being held on $210,000 bond. He has been in the county jail in McKinney, Texas for weeks. We'll have more on his criminal record here in a second. It is important to look at that when seeing how this case is allegedly played out. Now, on the same day that the boyfriend was arrested, Chelsea Berg, Dawson's mom, was also arrested. And this is her mugshot from that first arrest. KFTA TV says that she was arrested first on a charge of injury to a child by omission, and she was able to bond out of jail the day of her arrest. Her bond then was set at $100,000. Now, at first it was unclear what evidence law enforcement had on Berg, but then the text messages. And those texts allegedly showed a shocking level of awareness of what was allegedly happening to her son. One text that was from September 9th, so roughly a month before Dawson was taken to the hospital, she sends Alexander a text saying, quote, "He clearly hit his head when he fell. He has a bruise on his eyebrow and his whole jawline cheek is bruised. You're reckless. He had progressively been getting more and more hurt with you. Leave me alone. I'm not blind. You are dangerous." That was the text Chelsea Berg sent to Christopher Alexander. Then shortly after that, we're on September 18th now. This is roughly a month before her son goes to the hospital on life support. Berg allegedly texted her boyfriend, once again, 100,000% serious. You bruise him, hurt him, and cause damage every single time you are alone with him. There hasn't been a single time you've been alone with him where he hasn't been hurt. Not only did she seem aware that her boyfriend was allegedly abusing her son, and then she allows him to be around that boy alone, Alexander also has an alleged violent past. Alexander previously was convicted of theft and unlawful restraint, and the stalking charge that he's still facing is related to a separate case. Now, Dawson's dad also said that Berg allegedly knew that Alexander had an ankle monitor and that he was facing accusations in that stalking case. So she knew that this guy did not have a clean record, but yet allegedly allowed him to look after Dawson, who he had allegedly abused in the past. But this case is now going in a new direction. And if it could get there, a sadly more serious direction. This is the new mugshot that came in overnight of Chelsea Berg in Collin County, Texas. And online court records show that she is now charged with a count of capital murder. As for Alexander, he is now facing a charge of capital murder of someone under the age of 10. As for Dawson's dad, think about that man, now navigating the world without his son, and he's also raising Dawson's sister. He continued in his Facebook post saying, quote, "I'm 31 years old, having to bury my 3-year-old son, and I obviously wasn't prepared for this because we shouldn't have to bury our children. I haven't lost a family member or a friend, and now this is my first experience of death. As always, thank you to my friends, my family, even strangers coming to my aid to keep me on my feet. Thank you to the district attorney's office, the judges, my attorney, the McKinney Police Department, all helping find justice for my son. My biggest thank you is to all the medical staff that did everything they could and allowing me the opportunity to say goodbye to my son, allowing me the opportunity to hold him as he took his final breath." Joining us now to talk more about this once again is Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime. This is just such a horrific case from the very beginning and has taken this very, very sad turn that Dawson has lost his life. Now that Chelsea Berg and Christopher Alexander are facing capital murder charges, before we dive into the specifics, just what is capital murder, especially within the state of Texas?
Capital murder makes Alexander and Berg eligible for the death penalty and a potential life sentence without the possibility of parole. So it requires some sort of aggravating circumstances. Some states call it aggravated murder. That's what Tyler Robinson is facing in the Charlie Kirk case, or in California where I am, it's called special circumstances murder. But there's something more than just murder. And in Texas, killing a child, in this case, a 3-year-old child, does make both of them eligible for capital murder. The child has to be 10 years or younger historically. Recently, the legislature expanded that to 15 years or younger. And of course, Dawson, being 3 years old, qualifies for capital murder under Texas law.
We know through these text messages that prosecutors believe that Chelsea Berg was very well aware of the way that Christopher Alexander allegedly abused Dawson, not just on the day that Dawson went to the hospital with brain damage, but there were examples and evidence of this going on well before. Why is she, though, if she's not the one, and we don't know, I mean, I will say I'm waiting on some court documents to come in from McKinney, Texas, Collin County there, but based on what we know, she was aware this happened. Why would she be charged with murder if it's just at this point that she was aware of what Christopher Alexander was doing?
Well, that's what the defense is going to argue in Berg's case. They have to argue that it was Alexander who was responsible. That's really the only defense here. Generally speaking, he can't be charged with a criminal act for an omission. There are some exceptions. Obviously, a parent-child is one of those exceptions. You can be charged with neglect, for instance, or child endangerment, or child abuse for not protecting your child. To get it to murder, though, what the defense will argue is there's no actus reus, or act that Chelsea Berg committed that would make her eligible for capital murder or any type of murder. The state will argue, on the other hand, that it was her deliberate indifference to Dawson's life that makes this a murder case. She was essentially playing Russian roulette with his life, knowing that Christopher Alexander was a dangerous person. That's going to be the argument that's going to be made on both sides. So it's going to be interesting to see what a judge and jury do.
Yeah, because I think of Christopher Alexander, he was facing charges, and he still is, in a separate stalking case. He has a criminal record, and yet that could be argued as that's separate, you know, that this was a specific case that he's accused of. How much does his criminal record, the fact that this guy wasn't a saint, that could come into play in terms of how the prosecution may paint him if this goes to a trial?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First, the criminal record will play into the charging decision. Here's someone that has a violent history. Now, as far as the record coming into trial, that's going to be tougher. Obviously, if you're prosecutors, you want to get it in. The defense wants to keep it out. If he testifies, the fact that he's been convicted of a felony, that will come in. Prosecutors can't ask him whether he's a convicted felon. The underlying conduct may not come in unless it's some sort of prior bad act that shows some MO, some sort of pattern, lack of mistake. The defense somehow opens the door. Usually, more often than not, that prior criminal history does not come in because it is so prejudicial and the probative value is outweighed by that danger of prejudice.
This happened in October, allegedly, that Dawson was sent to the hospital. Christopher Alexander tells this story that he just fell and I don't know what happened. And then clearly the examination from doctors showed that was a lie. He has been in the hospital, now it's December, and he passes away according to his dad last night. Legally, and it seemed just from how his dad was talking about Dawson that it was unlikely that he was going to recover from these injuries. Legally anticipating this to be a murder case, what's going on behind the scenes, even with Berg and Alexander's attorneys and prosecutors, as you kind of wait to see how this is going to play out?
Yeah, behind the scenes, and yeah, we've been covering this case for quite some time, and we knew that Dawson had suffered a significant brain injury, was in a coma, and may not make it. But now that he has passed, unfortunately, now you're looking at those murder charges. So, obviously, what the prosecution is going to want to do is establish that medical causation. They're going to have the doctors come in and say because of the assault, the injuries, the harm that Dawson suffered months ago, that caused him to die in December. So that's where the experts will come in. Sometimes the defense will come and they'll try to attack causation. I don't think it's going to be effective, but obviously the defense is going to try to do what they can. Point the finger, say there was no intent and there was no causation, and that's one thing they'll probably go after, those prosecution experts.
Is there any possibility that they would be tried together, considering, I could see prosecutors pointing to these text messages show she was very well aware, according to them, of what was going on at home. Dawson had injuries well before he went to the hospital. If prosecutors wanted to argue that this was a team effort to inflict abuse on Dawson Zamora, would that potentially lead to them being tried together as opposed to it being separate?
Chris, prosecutors would absolutely love to try Chelsea Berg and Christopher Alexander together. The defense is going to do everything they can to sever those cases and split them. I think the defense will be successful because the defenses are very inconsistent. They're pointing the finger at one another, and that really has to be the only possible defense, especially when you're talking about Chelsea Berg, right? We know that women tend to do better in murder cases than men. Obviously, here is a boyfriend with a criminal history, and she's going to say that probably that she too was physically abused and she was a victim as well. That's a likely defense here, and it's very inconsistent with what Alexander's lawyers are going to present. So I fully expect the defense to file a severance motion, and I expect that motion to be granted given the facts and circumstances of this case.
When it comes to Chelsea Berg's defense, and I would, it seems like that would be the argument. You can even look at the text messages that she was talking about him being dangerous, and maybe the defense can use that as an argument that she was also a victim in this household, in this toxic domestic relationship. Of course, the prosecution can argue that at any point in time, knowing that her son was being abused, she could have gone to the police, but she didn't. How far can that I was a victim to defense actually go when it seems like the prosecution has a pretty strong case?
They have a very strong case, and obviously the prosecution wants to try these two together, dirty them up, and the jurors are going to absolutely hate them and what happened here. But I think Berg does have a shot because, again, she's a female, because of those text messages, and if she can argue that she was the victim of domestic violence, maybe the jurors may come back with a capital murder on Alexander, but when it comes to Berg, they might just charge her or convict her of a lesser crime, one of the ones that we've been talking about, the child abuse, the neglect. That would be a big win for the defense, at least as far as Chelsea Berg is concerned. Alexander's going to have a much tougher time. He's going to have to argue that it was Berg who was neglectful and violent, and he didn't have access to Dawson as much. It wasn't his child. He wasn't in the home. Again, expect to see finger pointing, but at least in terms of a defense, I think Berg really has one, where Alexander probably has a much more difficult time getting off on a charge like this.
I know you live in California, different situation when it comes to the death penalty and how often it's used. Texas has a reputation for being a state that's aggressive with the death penalty. How does that factor into how this moves forward, knowing if the defense, if Chelsea Berg's defense says, hey, we want to come make a deal? Typically in Texas, how does that go if they feel that they have the text messages and they can prove this case and then sentence her to death, and they would potentially want to do that? How does the death penalty in that state factor into any sort of plea negotiations?
Chris, it is huge, and you're right. California, we haven't had the death penalty for decades, so you don't have that leverage in negotiations as a prosecutor. Look, if you are a prosecutor in Texas and you're handling this case, you can say, you know what, Chelsea Berg, you're going to plead guilty to murder, and I'm going to take the death penalty off the table, right? That is a big bargaining chip that you have. And obviously, if you're defending these cases, and it's a capital case, a death penalty case, your only job as a lawyer, if you're handling a death penalty case, is to keep your client alive. I don't care if it's Brian Koberger. I mean, I think the defense would consider that a win, right? He's spending the rest of his life in Idaho State Prison, but he's not facing the death penalty. Nicholas Cruz, Parkland school shooter, again, they saved his life. That's a defense win. Even the Luigi Mangione case, Chris, I expect that those lawyers, what they're trying to do is keep their client alive. So if this ends up being a capital case, and if you do believe in the death penalty, this really should be a death penalty case. You tortured and killed this young boy. There's no legal or moral justification. That will change the bargaining position of the parties relatively, and obviously, especially someone like Berg, she may be much quicker to strike a deal. When you don't have the death penalty, and I'm not talking about whether it's just or for public policy reasons, but when you don't have the death penalty in states like California and the defendant is only facing a life sentence, and if you're the prosecution, you're not going to give any type of discount in a case like this, right? I mean, if it's a cruel and heinous murder, you're not going to give that defendant the possibility of parole. There's nothing to bargain. The defense, usually they just push the case to trial, hoping they can swing and connect, and it's really a Hail Mary type situation, but a lot of those cases end up going to trial because there's nothing the prosecution can give that would induce the defendant to take some sort of guilty plea.
I could see on the defense's end, and I'm not, saying I support it one way or another, but if Chelsea Berg argued that she was the victim of abuse, this is obviously her son. There's plenty of pictures of them, and she looks like, a loving mom. I could see the defense starting to paint that. If you're the defense attorney for Christopher Alexander and you have a criminal record, the story of him at the hospital, and I know everybody's deserves to have a defense, but he lawyers up really fast, tells the story that's completely inconsistent. You have all of this, not just the injuries that landed Dawson in the hospital where he lost his life, but the injuries that were on his body long before he goes to the hospital. Chelsea Berg, if she was to take and I'm getting ahead of myself, takes a plea deal and then she goes at Alexander saying that he was this abuser. I mean, how do you defend him if you're a defense attorney? Because that seems like the case is incredibly strong against him.
Yeah, that's going to be a very difficult case to defend. Not much of a defense. Like you said, there are bruises all over Dawson's body of different time periods, right? So this seems to be consistent with a pattern of repeated abuse. This wasn't just an accident. Obviously, the defense will either argue that it was an accident and Alexander just wasn't paying attention, accidents happen, or that it was Chelsea Berg who was the violent one. Not saying that has any chance of success, but you're right. The fact that Alexander dropped Dawson off at the hospital, lawyered up, and I think my recollection is he actually left. This isn't consistent with someone who cares about his stepson or his girlfriend's son. So certainly a terrible look all around. The text messages are very damaging. Obviously, Chelsea Berg's testimony as a cooperator would be very damaging to his case. I think you're likely going to see some sort of plea from Alexander, likely to take the death penalty off the table.
When someone goes to the hospital, because in the story where he shows up, Dawson has obviously a terrible, terrible injury. The story he's telling is that he was having lunch and he had a thud and he was in the other room and he doesn't know what happened. And doctors in that situation, especially dealing with such a young child, they need to know information fast so they know what kind of treatment maybe to give a young boy. And then someone lawyers up. That seems just publicly incredibly damning. Is that something that can be used by the prosecution in kind of arguing that this was a person who cared more about himself than he did the boy?
Absolutely not. That's what we call the golden rule. You cannot, under any circumstances, even reference the defendant's invocation of their right to remain silent. So if prosecution attorneys talk about it and say, well, he lawyered up and that means that he didn't care about Dawson, or that means that he had something to do with his death, that's structural error, it's reversible error. So prosecutors have to be very, very careful not to comment or draw any adverse inferences whatsoever. Now, that being said, jurors aren't stupid, right? They're going to know that here's someone who came to the hospital, wasn't helpful, right? Left Dawson. So they're going to draw their own inferences, but prosecutors have to be very, very careful about how they handle that particular piece of evidence.
Yeah, and just a major development in this story, and one that nobody wanted, that Dawson Zamora has passed away, and now his mom and her boyfriend facing capital murder charges. We'll see how it goes from here. Former federal prosecutor, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Nima Rahmani, thank you as always for being with us on Law&Crime.
Of course, Chris, thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.